Have you ever noticed it? That quiet, eerie moment when the life you're living no longer feels like the life you chose, but the life you were assigned. You're sitting in a room you've sat in 1,000 times, surrounded by people who know your name, listening to conversations you can predict word for word, and suddenly something in you whispers, "I don't belong here anymore." Not in a dramatic way, not in a rebellious way, in a dangerous way, the kind of truth that unravels everything. Because you still play the role, you still nod at the right moments, you still laugh on cue. But inside, something has cracked open, something you can't unsee. It's the moment you realize the person you've been performing as is not the person who is actually alive inside you. And once you notice it, you can never go back. This isn't feeling lost. This is recognition, a primitive cellular knowing you have outgrown who you were trained to be. Alan Watts said, "The ego isolates itself because it fears dissolution." And that's exactly what you're feeling, the first tremor of dissolution. The shell you built to survive is starting to crack. And the real danger isn't the loneliness. The real danger is that once you see the performance, you can no longer pretend the performance is you. If this hits you, stay with me. Because what comes next is the part no one ever talks about. When your old life starts dying before the new one has formed. Here's the part that feels like betrayal, but it's only the truth finally surfacing. You didn't grow into your personality. You constructed it, piece by piece, to survive. The you people think they know isn't a discovery you stumbled into. It's a structure you engineered under pressure, under fear, under expectation. When you were young, you learned quickly what earned you safety and what cost you love. So you adapted. You became the strong one because no one else was strong for you. You became the smart one because being useful was the only way to matter. You became the peacemaker because conflict meant danger. You became the achiever because perfection was the only shield thick enough to protect you from criticism. None of these were expressions of your nature. They were responses to your environment, adaptive strategies, masks that hardened into identity. But here's the darkest truth. Once a mask keeps you safe, you forget it's a mask. You call it your personality. Other people call it who you are. But internally, quietly, relentlessly, it exhausts you. Because armor is heavy when you wear it every day. Your strength was self-protection. Your independence was fear of burdening anyone. Your calm was dissociation. Your kindness was hypervigilance. Your resilience was untreated trauma. And every version of you that earned love, praise, approval, safety came at the same cost. You were never allowed to just be. You had to perform being. This is why you feel tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. It's not physical fatigue, it's identity fatigue. The exhaustion that comes from carrying a self that isn't actually you. Alan Watts said, "We treat the self as a single continuous thing, when really it's a convenient fiction. A character stitched together from reactions, roles, memories, fears. A mask we forget we're wearing. But the moment you start to outgrow the mask, the fiction collapses. And that collapse feels like losing yourself. But it's the first moment you've ever actually met yourself. There's a moment in every transformation where you stop fitting into the life you built while you were wounded. Not because you suddenly became wise or enlightened or spiritually elevated, But because your coping mechanisms no longer work the way they used to, the people-pleasing stops giving you belonging, the perfectionism stops giving you safety, the over-responsibility stops giving you control, your old self starts cracking, not out of failure, but because it was designed for a version of you that no longer exists. And this is where the real cost begins. Because the moment you grow beyond the identity that once kept you alive, you become incompatible with the environments that required you to stay small. You stop tolerating conversations that feel hollow. You stop pretending you're okay when you're not. You stop performing stability for people who never earned access to your truth. And suddenly, the rooms you used to fit in feel too tight, too loud, too misaligned with the person you are becoming. But here's the part no one warns you about. Outgrowing your old self means outgrowing the people who depended on that self, the ones who needed you agreeable, or predictable, or emotionally convenient. When you stop playing the role, the relationship stops functioning. And it's not because you did anything wrong. It's because the relationship was built on the version of you who didn't have boundaries, needs, or a voice. You begin losing tolerance for superficial apologies, forced optimism, emotional caretaking, and the quiet self-abandonment you used to call love. And when you stop performing, people don't say, "I'm glad you're finally being yourself." They say, "You've changed." Not as an observation, as an accusation, because your growth threatens the stability of their dysfunction. And this is where the loneliness hits hardest. Your old world stops recognizing you long before your new world arrives. You're too awake for who you were, but not grounded enough for who you're becoming. What's called the ego, the mask, and losing it feels like dying because in some ways it is. You're grieving the version of you that everyone was comfortable with, even though that version was slowly suffocating you. This is the cost of becoming real, the death of a self that was never truly yours. There is a stage in transformation that almost no one talks about because it doesn't look inspiring. It looks like collapse. It's the in-between stage, the no man's land of identity, where the old self is gone but the new self hasn't arrived yet. You're not who you were, but you're not anyone else either. And in that space, everything becomes unfamiliar. Your family feels foreign, as if you're suddenly speaking a language they've never learned. Small talk with friends feels suffocating, like you're shrinking yourself just to stay inside the room. Partners look at you with confusion, as if you've changed the rules of the relationship without warning, not realizing you're only trying to stop abandoning yourself. This is the era where you begin asking questions you never dared to ask. Why do I feel like a stranger in the places I grew up? Why am I too intense for people who once felt like home? Why does the truth inside me sound louder than the people around me? And the worst part? You cannot go back, but you cannot explain why you can't go back. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Your depth becomes a burden. Your awareness becomes a wedge. Your honesty becomes a threat. What once felt like belonging now feels like emotional dissonance. Your old patterns won't fit anymore, and your new ones aren't strong enough to stand on their own. This is the dark night of the soul. Not because you're broken, but because you're shedding an entire identity in real time. Your nervous system doesn't recognize the territory. Your heart doesn't recognize the rooms you walk into. You look around, and everything is the same. yet none of it feels like yours. You feel too deep for shallow connections, too honest for performative relationships, too awake for the dynamics that once made sense. And so you isolate, not because you want to, but because the alternative is self-betrayal. Watts once said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." And in this moment, that's exactly what it feels like. You are trying to hold on to a self you've already outgrown. You can't describe who you're becoming because you've never been them before. So you drift between worlds, between identities, between versions of yourself that no longer translate. This is the loneliness of becoming real, the heartbreak of losing roles that once protected you, the exile that happens when you no longer fit into the life you built while you were unconscious. And it's terrifying. But it's not a mistake. Every transformation requires a season where you walk alone, not as punishment, but as preparation. What you're experiencing isn't weakness, it's identity death. And identity death feels like grief, because it is grief. You are grieving the version of you who kept you alive, the one who learned the rules, who carried the weight, who tolerated the things you didn't have the power to change, who swallowed their needs so the room could stay calm, who performed closeness to avoid abandonment. When that version of you collapses, your brain reacts the same way it does when you lose a person. Shock, disorientation, numbness, waves of emotion with no predictable pattern. Not because you're dramatic, because the brain has lost its old safety map. For years, maybe decades, your nervous system associated survival with being a certain way. Be agreeable, be impressive, be self-contained, be useful, be harmless, be quiet. When you stop performing those roles, the brain doesn't say, "Congratulations on healing." It says, "Danger, unknown territory, recalibrate immediately." This is why you feel confused. This is why you feel tired in a way sleep doesn't touch. This is why you suddenly can't tolerate situations you used to endure with a smile. Your old emotional contracts are breaking. The contracts that said, "If I stay small, I'll be safe. If I don't need anything, no one can reject me. If I fix everyone, they won't leave. If I hide my pain, I won't burden anyone. If I stay predictable, I won't be punished." These weren't beliefs. They were survival algorithms. Your nervous system built an entire personality around avoiding the danger you were raised in. And now you're rewriting that code in real time. Of course you feel exhausted. Your brain is remapping safety, identity, and boundaries simultaneously. Of course you feel dissociated. You are stepping outside an identity that once kept you alive. Of course, your mood swings. You are grieving an entire psychological architecture while trying to build a new one. This is not instability. This is restructuring. Alan Watts said, "Suffering is resistance to what already is." Your suffering isn't coming from the transformation itself. It's coming from fighting the collapse of a self you were never meant to stay inside. You are not falling apart. You are deconstructing. Your old identity is dissolving because your internal world no longer fits inside it. This is identity death. And on the other side of identity death is identity truth. But first, you must walk through the fire of no longer being who you were while not yet being who you're becoming. It's disorienting. It's destabilizing. It's necessary. And it's the clearest sign that you're finally stepping into a life that matches your actual soul. Here's the truth almost no one tells you. When you stop performing the version of yourself that kept everyone else comfortable. People feel threatened, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your growth exposes their stagnation. You were once predictable, manageable, containable. You played the role they wrote for you, the strong one, the quiet one, the fixer, the stable one, the one who didn't need anything, the one who absorbed the impact so other people didn't have to. Your identity kept the ecosystem running, and when you stop playing that part, their world starts to shake, because suddenly your no replaces your compliance, your boundaries replace your availability, your honesty replaces your silence, your clarity replaces the fog they relied on, your self-respect replaces the version of you who tolerated the intolerable, and people who benefited from your old identity will always resist your new one, not because they're evil, but because your change forces them to confront what they don't want to see: their entitlement, their immaturity, their dependence on your self-abandonment, their refusal to grow. Your transformation pulls the mask off the system. It shows who was taking, who was avoiding, who was hiding, who was using your niceness as a shield to avoid facing themselves. You were the glue, and when the glue stops holding, everything reveals its actual shape. Alan Watts said it perfectly. People cling to their illusions. Your awakening threatens the collective dream. You waking up threatens the illusion other people needed to stay asleep. They aren't reacting to your truth. They're reacting to the fact that your truth disrupts the version of reality they created to protect themselves. Your growth demands that they look inward. Most people won't. So instead, they try to drag you back into the role that required your silence. They say, "You've changed. You're difficult. You're selfish. You're cold. You're not the same person anymore." Of course you're not. You're not performing the character they assigned to you. You're not the emotional sponge anymore. You're not their stability blanket. You're not their coping strategy. You're not the version of you that made their life easier at the expense of your own soul. When you stop abandoning yourself, the people who depended on your self-abandonment will call it betrayal. When you create boundaries, the people who violated them will call it cruelty. When you tell the truth, the people who relied on your silence will call it aggression. And when you finally grow, the people devoted to their own comfort will call it chaos. But here's the darkest truth. They're not afraid of losing you. They're afraid of meeting themselves without the buffer of the person you used to be. Your awakening threatens their illusion. Your awakening dissolves the dream they were determined to stay inside. And that is why, when you finally step into who you are, some relationships shatter on impact. Not because you did something wrong, but because your truth requires a level of maturity they cannot, or will not, reach. You didn't destroy anything. You simply stopped pretending. And the moment you did, the whole structure showed its cracks. There comes a moment in every transformation when the old identity finally collapses, not with drama, but with a quiet, irreversible honesty. You realize you were never the personality you defended. You were never the role you perfected. You were never the mask you held in place long after it started to crack. Those were survival strategies, useful once, necessary even, but never you. The real you isn't collapsing, the performance is. And underneath it, something ancient begins to breathe again. Something unconditioned, unscripted, unafraid. The moment you step out of the identity you spent decades constructing, you discover something unsettling. You are not the character. You are the awareness playing it. The observer behind the thoughts, the presence beneath the personality. The consciousness watching the mask fall away and realizing, for the first time, that it was never fused to your skin. This is the rebirth no one prepares you for. You don't become someone new. You return to the you that existed before the world told you who to be, before the good girl conditioning, before the strong one act, before the caretaker identity, before the survival roles were mistaken for personality. There is a freedom in this that feels almost dangerous. You see clearly that the self you clung to was always temporary, always fluid, always a story. And for the first time in your life, you feel the ground beneath the story. The ground that doesn't move when people disapprove. The ground that doesn't break when your roles dissolve. The ground that doesn't shatter when your old world collapses. The ground is you. Not the conditioned self, but the witnessing self. The quiet, unshakable consciousness that was there before your wounds and will remain after they heal. And once you touch that part of you, everything changes. You stop gripping, you stop forcing, you stop proving, you stop performing. You realize you were never meant to live bent under the weight of roles that were killing you. You were meant to live from awareness, fluid, responsive, alive. The personality can shift, the ego can dissolve, the roles can fall away. But awareness, the true self beneath the self, that remains untouched. And when you meet that version of you, the one beneath the noise, beneath the stories, beneath the expectations, you understand something profound. You were never lost. You were just buried. And now, finally, you are waking up. There is a moment in transformation that no one talks about, a moment far more terrifying than the collapse. It's the moment you realize you're becoming someone you can't perform anymore. Someone quieter, someone deeper, someone who doesn't bend for belonging, someone who doesn't dilute their truth just to keep a room calm. It's disorienting at first, because the emerging self doesn't operate the way your old identity did. The old you chased, performed, explained, softened your edges, negotiated your worth, adjusted yourself to fit the emotional climate of whatever room you entered. The new you doesn't. The new you values peace more than approval, depth more than entertainment, truth more than harmony, alignment more than attachment. And that shift, that inner reorientation, terrifies you because it threatens the entire architecture of your old life. The people who relied on your compliance feel you slipping. The dynamics you once maintained start to crack. The relationships built on your silence begin to tremble. Because when you stop performing, people lose the version of you they depended on. And here is the truth most people avoid. You can lose people and still find yourself. In fact, you often have to. Your new self doesn't chase, not because you're cold, but because you finally understand that anything you have to chase wasn't choosing you in the first place. Your new self doesn't shrink, not because you're arrogant, but because you've outgrown the need to apologize for existing. Your new self doesn't carry what was never yours to hold, not because you're selfish, but because you've stopped mistaking self-abandonment for love. This is the phase where you begin to realize authenticity is not loud, not dramatic, not defiant. It's quiet, precise, clean, honest. It's the version of you that doesn't need an audience to validate your worth or a relationship to stabilize your identity. Alan Watts said that life is not a performance to perfect. It's a flow to join. And that's the difference now. You're no longer trying to control your life like a script that must be executed without errors. You're letting yourself flow into a selfhood you never had permission to consider. A selfhood without masks, without roles, without apology, without the weight of everyone else's expectations strapped to your back. And it's terrifying because this version of you is unfamiliar. It's powerful, it's grounded, it's awake, and somewhere deep down, you know you can't go back. You can only go forward into this quieter, braver, more honest version of yourself. The one you were always meant to become, once survival was no longer running the show. You are not breaking down. You are breaking open. You are not losing yourself. You are losing the version of you that was built from fear, approval, and survival. And that loss feels like death. Not the death of you, but the death of every mask you were forced to wear to stay loved, to stay safe, to stay chosen. Listen closely. Everything that feels like it's falling apart is just everything false losing its grip. The exhaustion? That's your body putting down the story it was never meant to carry. The grief? That's the emotional debt you were too busy surviving to feel. The loneliness? That's the space being cleared for the people who can meet the real you. Not the costume, not the role, not the version of you they preferred. This isn't the end. This is the doorway. You are not malfunctioning. You are reconfiguring. You are not collapsing. You are shedding. You are not too much. You're finally becoming exactly yourself without distortion. Identity death feels like drowning until you realize you were never meant to breathe underwater in the first place. What you're experiencing is the first inhale your soul has taken in years. Alan Watts said that the real you is not the puppet being pushed around by life. It is the awareness waking up to the strings you never actually needed. And that's you now, awakening, returning, re-entering your own life without the armor that once kept you alive but now keeps you small. So hear this. You are not dying. You are waking up. And waking up is violent only to the illusions. The self beneath the self. The one that was buried, silenced, edited, condensed, is rising. Slowly, steadily, unmistakably. And when you meet that self fully, you will understand something sacred. You were never broken. You were becoming. You were never lost. You were shedding the version of you that was never truly yours. And you were never alone, just surrounded by people who only knew the mask. Now the mask is gone. Now the truth is showing. Now you step forward, not as who the world taught you to be, but as who you are. Write this below if it's time. I'm ready to stop abandoning myself. And here's the truth. This is not your ending. This is your emergence. The moment you outgrow the wrong people, you create space for the right ones. People who understand you without translation, who don't need you to shrink, who meet you at your depth. People who respect your evolution, who speak your new language. You don't chase them. You don't hunt for them. You don't beg for a seat. You simply keep growing, and the ones meant for you will rise to meet you. Outgrowing people isn't betrayal. It's proof you're on the right path. If you feel alone, misunderstood, distanced, different, that's the sign. You are shedding your old self. You are becoming someone powerful. You are stepping into a new level of consciousness. And yes, you will lose people. You will lose places. You will lose versions of yourself. But what you gain is your real life finally beginning. Keep going. Don't shrink. Don't apologize. Don't return to who you had to be. You outgrew them for a reason.